I think every guy listening can resonate with that moment of, wow, that's who I used to be. And I was very proud of that man. And then now I've been so far drifted from him. I don't know how to get back, or I don't know how to create that again in my life. I talk about this in the book. One of the chapters, it's called The Three Horsemen of Death. It's guilt, shame, and regret. And in that is that tie to those feelings of shame and guilt and regret of looking back and seeing what we once were and being disappointed that we're no longer that man, or being disappointed that we're so far removed from him that we just get down on ourselves and criticize ourselves and judge ourselves. To get back to him, to sit there and actually confront that, is to realize one thing. The reason I called them the three horsemen of death, because they all have one thing in common. They live in the past. And every single one of them, if you live in the past, you live in death.
Johnny, my brother, welcome back to the Superhuman Life.
Dude, thank you, Frank. I appreciate you having me back, brother. And obviously, I love your show. I love what you stand for. So just an honor to be back jamming out with you for a little bit, man. Thank you.
Absolutely, brother. We love these more than anything, man. Is getting a chance to just really chop it up, man, and have a great conversation with a guy that is out there doing amazing work. For the audience, if you haven't done so yet, after hearing today's episode, make sure to go back and listen to episode 87. I'm going to link that down there in the show notes. But we had Johnny on almost 2 years ago, where we laid out a little bit of your story, what's kind of led you here. We talked about the blueprint for building masculinity in our life. Today, we're going to go a little bit deeper. You got a brand new book that's coming out here. We want to make sure we kind of talk about all that, but it's centered around developing the man within. I think that's even the title of the book, is The Man Within. And I know it's to help guys really overcome the everyday struggles and challenges within their lives. So to maybe kind of kick this conversation off, Johnny, what is the biggest struggle that men are facing in today's world? In a second part of that question, is the struggle internal or external?
Yeah, I know you know this, brother, and it's 100%. I am finding personally what I find through coaching and through interviews and things like that on the show, on my podcast, is the fact that yes, it's an internal struggle, it's an internal war within. And what I'm finding, most guys that are losing from the top 1% elite to just the everyday man, what they're losing is confidence in themselves and purpose. Like they can't find any type of connection in those two things. And then what happens is they end up losing who they are in this world. So they're just lost in general, and they end up losing the man that brought them to the point where they felt confident in themselves. So whatever that means, like sometimes it's, and I hate saying it, but sometimes what I have found is that men are losing themselves when they get married. And when they have kids, they forget that they have to also put effort and time into who they are to continue to be that strong, confident man. And that's when I have guys reach out to me and they're like, I'm not showing up for my kids. I'm not showing up for my relationships. I'm like, bro, what's going on? They're like, I've lost it. I've lost who I was. I'm not confident. I get walked over. I don't have a place to stand on. I don't have a sovereign man inside of me. And I can't find myself to have the strength to be that pillar in my own life. And that's what I find men are struggling with. And it might sound like guys might hear this and be like, that's not me. But bro, I would challenge you. Are you really confident in who you are? Are you standing up to represent what that healthy masculine is, not only to your kids, but to your wife, to your friends, to your family, to everybody else who looks up to you? And a lot of guys, if you're really honest with yourself and you look at how you stand up for yourself and your self-worth and how you stand up for certain morals and ethics and principles in this life, you might be a little shocked that you're not standing up in that. And so I ask guys to take that introspection. But when I have these conversations, I'm starting to find this common theme. And obviously that's with the people that I coach, that's with the community that I have. So it's a sample size, but it's what I'm finding is starting to be a common thread. And it scares me because I want men to have that sovereignty. I want men to love themselves and love their lives so they can give more to everybody else.
Yeah, I love that so much, man. Talk to me about the connection relationship between confidence and purpose, because that was really one of the first things you shared is men are struggling with confidence and lack of purpose. I'm just curious the relationship between the two, because I believe when you know who you are and we know what your purpose here is in the world, the confidence is really going to be the byproduct of that. It's like if I know what I'm here to do and I'm actually living it out every single day, confidence is going to be the result. I don't actually have to work on my confidence. I'm just doing what I'm here to do. But a man that is struggling with his purpose, I'm going to assume that's probably going to be a lot of the cause to that lack of confidence. So talk about the relationship between those two.
Yeah, and it's vice versa too. You can't have a man that knows his purpose without having his confidence. They go hand in hand. They go both directions, because if you're not confident in yourself, like one of the things, and I talk about this in the book, but I've been talking about this to people for a while, is like, people want to always talk about purpose and they always want to push this. You and I know a million coaches out there, self-development coaches, who are always like, you got to find your why. You got to find your why, but they have no method to get there for you. And also they don't give you any tools to really find that why. Well, what happens is, because the why is so big, bro, you're talking about something that wakes you up every day, that literally says, when all the rest of the things, when the shit hits the fan, like that thing still pulls you to go do it. That to me is what purpose really is, like a life's purpose. And people are trying to get you to find that in some 30 days. It's not real. And you can't just go ahead and grab purpose. But what you can do is you can find passion. But what you have to chase passion is confidence, because there is the chance of failure. There is the chance of being let down. There is the chance of saying, wow, I'm just going to hang it up because this just isn't as fun anymore. Like, you have all of these conflicts that you're going to end up butting up against, even when you follow passion. But doing that passion is like dating in life, right? We're trying on different things that potentially could turn into purpose. Like people will be like, oh, is your purpose like serving men? Well, I don't know, to be honest. Like, I love doing it. I wake up every day wanting to do something to support men and coach them and teach them and give them something that has helped me through the hard times. And there's been a lot of hard times over the last 6 years where, yeah, I've contemplated, should I hang this up? Should I not hang it up? Should I do something else? But then I get pulled right back to it. So is it starting to look like purpose to me? Sure. But can I confidently say that? I don't know that, because right now it seems like an extremely strong passion that looks like purpose to me, and I feel like it could be, but I still give it time to still date it and figure out if that's really where I'm driving towards. And that's the same thing that we all need, but we can only embrace that. We can only embrace different passions to try them out when we are confident, because there is the threat of failure on every single one of them. There is the threat of potentially wanting to hang it up because it just isn't something that fills you up anymore. And those things can be debilitating to a man. They can be emasculating to a man. They can drive a man to start going down his own deep, dark hole because of the fact that he feels like he's a failure because he hung it up. But when you have that confidence in yourself, you're like, no, that was a season of my life. I enjoyed it. I thought it potentially could be something like my life's purpose. It didn't end up being that way. Let me try another shoe on.
Yeah, and this is really a new kind of way to look at purpose, passion, and confidence. I don't think we've explored it through this lens before. So I really like kind of where we're going with it, Shawnee, that it's going to be our passion that drives our purpose. But ultimately, in order for us to be passionate with something, we have to hold that confidence. So all of this, from what I'm hearing, is centered and founded and rooted in a man's confidence. So if that's where all of this is going to start, let's get tactical here. Like, let's kind of zoom it down here into building confidence. So a guy's struggling right now, right? Is like, he doesn't know what his purpose, and he doesn't really have like clear things that he's maybe passionate about, because ultimately we know he's an unconfident man. So what are some steps that a man can take here today in developing self-confidence?
Yeah, this is such a great question, bro. This is why I love like chatting with you, and I love listening to your podcast, because you do such a great job with this to facilitate like what's actually going to help guys. And this is one of those questions that I look at and I'm like, yeah, we got to get tactical. We can't just say arbitrary stuff and be esoteric about this. We need to give guys these tangible tools. And one of them is think back, like especially guys that are struggling to figure. And this is another thing. Guys come to me and they're like, I'm like, hey man, what do you do once a week for yourself? What do you like? I don't know what I like. What do you mean you don't know what you like? Like, how do you not know what you like, bro? Because they've given up everything to their identity. They've forgotten it. And so what I tell guys to do, I learned this from a friend of mine, Garen Jones, really awesome human being. But he was saying, when he was in prison in France, he was like, what I did was I went back to something that I enjoyed as a kid. And for him, it was running. So he would run in circles around the like prison outside, and he would just run in circles. And so he would do that. And he was like, he'd have a smile on his face and he felt it. And he's like, what else did I love doing when I was a kid? He's like, I love singing. So he started running and singing in prison around the outside courtyard, around everybody else, and just running. And guess what happened? People started to run and sing with him in prison. And people started to have this happiness. And I was like, bro, that's such a beautiful lesson, because I think when it comes to confidence in men, the first thing we have to do, especially when we lose ourselves in life, is go back to what we loved before society and expectations got to us? What was something you just enjoyed doing for you when you were a kid and there was nobody else putting pressures on you? What is it that just filled you up and put a smile on your face and you were like, that right there is what I looked forward to every single day when I was like doing my homework at school or in my house. I was like, I couldn't wait to go do this. What was that for you? And I ask guys that, and guys will have an answer for that. They'll be like, man, I love being outside. We grew up kind of close to the forest and I would go take walks in the woods every day. And I'm like, great, bro. How many times you been on a hike recently? Years. Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's get back to something. You can start instilling confidence by giving back to yourself and filling up that energetic box that you're leaving empty, something that like you had when you were a kid, and giving that back to yourself. That's going to make you start to feel good, and you're going to start to carry yourself a little more. You're higher. You're going to start to keep your shoulders back. You're going to start to feel like you're finding yourself again. And that's where confidence starts, because then you're going to be like, man, I used to just go out and play pickup basketball games. Maybe I'll just go drive down to the basketball court tonight and see, I know there's an adults league going down there. Maybe I can go jump in and pick it up. That right there is going to put you in a very uncomfortable position that you haven't been in a while, but you took that step because there was a little bit of confidence in you that brought you back to something that made you happy. And so that is kind of like the easiest tool I have seen that I use in my toolbox. That is like the easiest way to start that transition back to finding that confidence in who we are. And I'd love to hear you, bro. Like, what do you got for that? Because I know you got some tools for this too.
Dude, that's amazing, man. Like, as you're sharing this, I'm like, once again, an answer like coming from a way we've never heard before, right? Confidence, yeah, keep your promises, right? Have small daily wins, like the kind of Jocko Willink, right? Structure equals freedom. Like you're struggling with confidence because I see it as lack of confidence is you hold a sour reputation with yourself. Like you're not confident in your person, because here's the thing is we can lie to other people, right? We can say, yeah, I went to the gym yesterday. Yeah, I didn't eat the cookie after dinner. Yeah, I woke up when the alarm went off. We can tell all those things to other people, so we can project confidence onto another individual. Johnny can't tell Johnny he didn't go to the gym, though, and have him
Right.
believe it. So I think a lot of times the way that I've always seen it is our lack of confidence is just the poor relationship that we hold ourselves. Because I've always said, like, your confidence is going to be built by keeping the small promises you make to yourself. So
Absolutely.
what are you not doing on a daily basis that you say you want to do? Well, start doing those things and you'll begin to develop confidence. But I love the angle and approach of no, like actually go back to the roots. Like, who were you as a child? Like, go inject some fun. Like, we could talk through this through a neuroscience perspective, right? Like, I'm all into the brain. That's a big part of what we do here. There's a center within our brain that literally, when we are engaged in playful activity, playful recreation, that part of our brain lights up. Well, you suppress that, you're not getting that part of your brain activated. Well, if you're not activating all parts of your brain, then are you fully utilizing every single tool that you're equipped with? No. So I love the whole approach of like, yeah, just come back to being like a human being, inject some fun, inject some play, go do the things that bring you joy and passion, because you know you're going to be confident there, and then have that carry over into other areas of your life.
Yep. And that's when you can put in a lot of those other tactics. And those are always great tactics. But, at the end of the day, I'm all about bringing you back to that, bringing you back to the things on where you started this life. We're even pushing back that way. You see certain diets going back to the ancestral ways of living. Like you're seeing people come up with these barefoot shoes, right? I wear those in the gym. They help you to have better connection with the ground. Like great things to make you ergonomically more familiar to how we evolved. And so it's like all of these things are taking us back to the basics. And why aren't we doing that even with confidence, even with who we are? Like the basics are where we were built from. Those are the underlying subconscious themes. If we can go back to those things and give them pleasure and stoke them within our own minds again and in our own hearts and our own energy again, like we're going to put ourselves in a very different place than we've seen in a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Following up with that, Johnny. So I got a guy in the ear here, right? He's listening to this. He's hearing this. Like, he's like, Johnny, man, I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. I'm doing well. Bills are paid. Family's taken care of, provided for. I wake up at 6. I drive to the office. I hate it, right? I'm just not happy. I'm not fulfilled. I'm not living in my purpose. And what you're telling me is I need to go do some things that I used to enjoy doing. Now, connect that with me and how me going out and playing baseball, because that's what I used to love when I was a kid, is going to help now bring purpose and passion into my life. Fill in that gap for me.
Well, this is where you're going to end up finding a little bit more of that confidence, right? So what we're trying to do is start to build a neural connection your aspect, Frank, is like that neural connection. We're trying to connect you back to the times in which you actually embodied that confidence. So what we're doing is we're actually creating that synaptic connection to where we can actually link that hardwire of happiness and confidence back into your life, because at some point you lost it. Right. At some point that got taken away from you, whether it's society, whether it's your job, whether it's expectations, whatever it is. Right. That at some point that got taken away from you, and that synaptic connection, that hardwiring got broke. And from there, we stopped having that in our lives, which then started to deteriorate a lot of the person we believed we were. Because those things made us happy, because those things made us confident, we had an expectation of who we were when we walked around everywhere, which is how we embodied that form of confidence. But once that all got broken, everything else shattered. And then we started over again, and we started over from a broken foundation because all of that was gone. We took that away from our lives. Now you go back and you're like, yeah, I'm playing baseball. I feel great. I look forward to Tuesdays and Thursday nights because I'm going and playing in an adult league, playing baseball every week, right? And that is fun for me. And guess what? You're laughing, you're having conversations, you're probably making friends. You might even be going out and having a beer afterwards with them, creating better relationships because it's coming from a place of enjoyment. And guess what? You're starting to feel more like that confident, either adolescent or kid or young dude again. And then now you're like, cool, now I'm going to take that. And there's another thing I want to go try. I just got invited out by this group to go do a hike. And that seems like a lot of fun. And I normally wouldn't go do that, but I'm going to go do that now. And it's going to put you in experiences. Now, the experiences, this is where you're going to start finding things that you may like and dislike in those experiences. And when you find those things that you like or dislike, the likes could potentially become a passion. Oh shit, I really love hiking, man. And I also love like baseball. I wonder if there's a way for me to link this where we do a thing every weekend where it's like we're going to play a baseball game and then go drive an hour and do a hike together as a team, because that's going to be a lot of fun. And then you're all of a sudden starting to create some form of experience for people, which could potentially be turned into some form of business venture or some form of idea that you're going to take forward into how you serve your community or how you serve other people in this world. Now, all of a sudden, you're experimenting with ideas of passion to create that purpose. So it's like this progression of starting to link neurologically back to that feeling of confidence, back to that feeling of empowerment, letting that guide you into putting yourself into experiences. And in the experiences, we can find out, are there things that we never knew about that we like that potentially could be a rabbit hole that we go down and experience that as a passion for a time being, or potentially turning to that purpose. But it allows us to have that confidence to expand our awareness into different areas of our lives, in different areas that we just don't even know about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's powerful, man. And I think one of the big things that really jumped out to me there is you talked about like the stories that we believe about who we are. Like there's been a past story of ourselves, there's a current story, there's a version that we're living here today. And I know you know this as well, and it's a big part of what you write about in the book, is oftentimes I think a lot of men are held back from taking action based upon the story that they're believing about themselves as who they are. Yeah, I know who I used to be, right? I used to be this great kid. I was athlete, sport, growing up, people loved me. But then I made some choices and decisions in my life, Johnny, right? And these decisions have now shaped me into who I am today. So I can't go back to becoming that person because this is who I am today. So many are caught up, men are caught up in maybe the guilt or shame around the story narrative that they're telling themselves, right? You get with me where I'm at right now. How does a guy begin to kind of change that narrative, rewrite that story so he's not going to allow the guilt, shame hold on to himself, and he can get back to his roots?
Yeah, this one's incredibly powerful, because this is one I think every guy listening, myself included, can resonate with that moment of being like, having like, wow, that's who I used to be. And I was very proud of that man. And then now I've like been so far drifted from him that I don't know how to get back, or I don't know how to create that again in my life. And this, I talk about this in the book, and it's one of the chapters. It's called The Three Horsemen of Death. And it's the guilt, shame, and regret. And in that is that tie to those feelings of shame and guilt and regret, of looking back and seeing what we once were and being disappointed that we're no longer that man, or being disappointed that we're so far removed from him that we just get down on ourselves and criticize ourselves and judge ourselves. And to get back to him, to sit there and actually confront that, is to realize one thing, that The reason I called them the three horsemen of death, because they all have one thing in common. They live in the past. And every single one of them, if you live in the past, you live in death. You're not living in the present moment, nor are you living for anything that could be tangible in the future. You're looking at what could have been that is unchangeable at this point in stage in your life. And if you're doing that, you are not living at all. You may as well put yourself in a box, because that's the way that you're living this game. And so I named it that specifically because I saw that as death for us, that you're just a walking zombie at that point. So we have to come to terms with the fact that we have to own our past. We have to own the seasons that we've been through. We have to own the decisions that we've made, whether good or bad. The ones that separated us from that confident man, the ones that separated us from the powerful man that we used to be, the one that we love, the one that we brag about to everybody. I used to do this. We have to separate ourselves from that by releasing that, one, and also coming to terms with the decisions that took you away from him and saying, I made those decisions. It wasn't anybody else. Everything I said and did was what separated me from there. Every night that I said, I'm not going to go to the gym and I'm going to sit down because I'm tired and I'm going to watch TV and I'm going to eat some popcorn, that was a decision I made. Nobody forced me. Frank wasn't there, put a gun to my head and said, sit down, eat popcorn and watch TV. No, like nobody else did this for us. We did this. So we have to take ownership. And in that ownership is the power to finally move forward from the past, because we have to give ourselves grace and say that the decisions we made were what we thought were the best at the time for whatever reason. And we own those decisions and we own the consequences of those decisions. But in the present moment, we get the opportunity to say that gets to change now. We get the opportunity to own what we do from this moment forward. And we get the opportunity to lay out a plan that says, I don't want to feel regret in 20, 30 years again. I don't want to be 10 more years down the road and think that this man right now is a good man and that I'm even worse than him, so I have more regret. I don't want to do that. I want to look back at that guy and say, I can be a 2.0 version of him, the guy that used to be that I really loved. I can do that now, and I can start that today. So let me own and acknowledge the stuff that I've done. Let me own and acknowledge the man that I am now and that I used to be, and let me forgive myself for that. Let me have some grace for myself and say that I get the opportunity to still change. Because at the end of the day, you're still on this side of the dirt. If you're having this conversation with yourself, if you're listening to this podcast, you're still on this side of the dirt. So you have the ability to change anything that you have that was in the past. You have the ability to change that today, and it doesn't have to plague your life. And you don't have to sit with that perpetual cycle of negativity, wondering how things could have been different. You can make them different. So that's what I go into when we talk about that shame, guilt, and regret, and what it looks like, and why I even name it the three horsemen of death.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this before we hit record here today, and I love the title of that chapter. And I was shocked that you hadn't read the book. I talked about it a handful of times here on the podcast, but one of the most transformative books that I've read over these last probably 4 years. I think I read it 4 years. It's Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. And in the book, he gives this spectrum of consciousness, right? Like it's literally on a spectrum. And at the top of it is enlightenment, and at the bottom of the spectrum of consciousness would be death, right? Like death is going to be the absence of any type of consciousness. You have enlightenment, the ultimate pinnacle. It's like you are just aware of everything, how you are fully connected. And then death, like the absence and complete, like no consciousness at all. Right above on the spectrum, the first layer above death is shame. So living in the state of being of shame. Like he writes it as like, it's not a feeling. Shame is not a feeling or an emotion. It's a state of being. It is the energy at which you're projecting out in the world. Right above shame is guilt. So literally the first two levels of consciousness above death are shame and guilt. That's where you're operating out of, which is why I think it's so incredible that you titled the book or titled the chapter, The Horsemen of Death. So if we need to own the past to get over the guilt and shame, what are steps we take to own the past?
Well, first is to identify what it is that you feel, or what it is that is putting you into that shame state, what it is that's putting you into that guilt state, right? And you need to identify the actions that happened, or the scenario that happened, or potentially the trauma that happened, right? We have to identify what it is that is bringing us to that. And it could potentially be multiple scenarios. So it's going to take, again, this doesn't come easy. You got to do the work. And so you got to sit down and write this out and say, okay, what were the scenarios? Because what happens is, like, our brains aren't great. You know this. Our brains aren't great at categorizing. We're not great at that. Mentalists are phenomenal at this, right? Like, mentalists, they can actually build huge categories, and they can actually really document where everything is through what they call through their oh wow, I'm blanking on it. It's their mind palaces. So they create these mind palaces, and it's typically a familiar place in their life that they've had. And then within that palace, they end up placing memories in there. So they're able to track memories everywhere. Our brains aren't great at this. So what happens is, if you're not capable of creating that memory palace, that mind palace, you have to figure out a way that you're going to bring these forward, because what's happening is they're sitting underneath, and a lot of guys can be living in that shame and guilt and not even realize what the scenarios are there that did it. They're just kind of living in it because subconsciously it's underneath them. So we have to bring that out, put it in the light, and say, this is what's going. So we got to sit down and think about that. Well, what is it that pushed me to think, to have this guilt? What is it that pushed me to have this shame, to feel this state of shame, or to be in this state of shame? And then write those down, because once you do that, now all of a sudden they're on display. You know where you need to go. You know the shadow that's sitting out for you. And then from there, you go and you can speak to that scenario. You can speak to that moment and either forgive yourself or forgive the person that did it to you, so that you can have some form of completion of that situation or that scenario. And then allow yourself to say that you are safe, that nothing is going to harm you. That, especially if it was when you were very young, it's to let that little boy version of yourself know that he's safe, that it's okay, that he'll be protected, that you have him, that nobody else can harm him again. It's doing that past work where you see that. And part of that is also, I have guys walk through this when they're doing work on this, but list out the age that you were too. Like, put the age that you were, the scenario that happened that makes you feel that shame or that guilt, or put you in that state of shame and guilt, and then address that and address you at that age. And when you do that, it's basically making yourself objective. It's putting yourself back from you. It's put in a weird way. It's putting yourself back from yourself and then acknowledging yourself at different ages. And as you process those moments, you're able to forgive yourself. You're able to give grace. And then this is a repeated process, because it's not going to happen overnight. If you do it once, doesn't mean you're done. Like, you got to go back and do this, which is why we write them down, so we can go back to them and address them and move through them. And the more we do this, the more we actually start to feel that shame, that guilt start to lift off of us and move away from us. And we start to lose that as part of our identity, and start to allow the positive energy to come out that allows us to look in the present moment, in the future. And it allows us to look at the changes that we would like to make. If it's something that we caused or something we did, that's when we're like, cool, I have forgiven myself. I've worked through this process. Now the next step is, okay, how do I change what I did there? Or am I already a different man than when I did that? And did I already make that change? And it's acknowledging that as well, because you may have already created that change and you've never acknowledged yourself for it. And therefore, you're still sitting with the guilt and the shame, not realizing that you've already taken the steps to kind of eradicate that, but you haven't acknowledged that within yourself. So it's understanding that, okay, let me now see, what is the change that I want to make if I was the one that did that, and what does that change look like? And then how can I implement that in my life? Or have I already done this? And then giving yourself recognition for that. So that's like the big two steps that I work with when we're talking about dealing with those. Is that pretty tangible?
100%, 100%. No. And I think the biggest kind of thing that I'm hearing, right, is we have to detach ourselves from whatever the event or whatever the thing that we did that's causing the shame, right? It's like, we must and that's why it's so important to like identify the age at which this happened to you, right? It's like, if it's in the past, detach yourself from the moment, because shame, I've always seen it as like, right, it's like we see shame as like we've done something, so it makes us a bad person. So we're holding on, it almost becomes an identity, is like, I am this person because I do these things. For example, like with porn addicts, right, is I am a bad person because I'm addicted to pornography. No, you have some compulsive behaviors in your life. We must detach ourselves though in order to like transcend that shame, that now we can become the man that's no longer struggling with his behaviors. But if we hold on to the shame and guilt that's wrapped up, then we're layering ourselves with the identity, is like, because I've done these things, it makes me this type of person.
Right. Exactly. And we don't want to classify ourselves as that, because of the fact that like a lot of the shame and even the guilt, both of those typically come from when we violated some form of moral principle or ethic that we carry. And if you violated that, regardless of whether it was a white lie violation or something more severe, when we violate that, that's when we start to have these little chips of shame or guilt carried around with us. And then we start to create those scenarios. So we see those past scenarios in which we've done that. And then that's what we start to carry around with us. And what I've seen, at least when I see shame and guilt really pervade somebody's life.
Yeah, no, 100%. Let's talk about self-love. I think it's really one of my favorite conversations. The one that's probably most like, what's Frank talking like? What is these two grown bearded men talking about self-love? Because I think, God, it's such an epidemic, man, like in the world
Yeah.
today. Men just do not care for themselves. They say that they love others. They love their wives. They put their wives first. They love their kids. But man, it starts, you got to love yourself. So speak to me about the importance of self-love and how you kind of coach and help men in developing love and care for themselves.
Well, it's funny because like a lot of everything I teach and talk about, like that's kind of all in the book. So I hate like I don't want to be like, oh, I wrote about this in the book, but I did, and it was called A Man After Martyrdom. It's chapter 15, and I named that chapter A Man After Martyrdom because men, they take self-love from their life and as a form of being a martyr, because at some point we're told that men are only good for one thing, and that's sacrifice. And so if men are constantly living a life in sacrifice, they're never looking at themselves as being worthy of joy and happiness, which is why then men sit and put themselves in pain and shame and guilt. And they sit in those things because they feel like that's the only thing they deserve, because they're going to take that on for their families because they're the ones that can handle it. Right. So it's this simple identification of thinking that there's some pride in the pain and that makes them a man. But what that makes you is a shell of a man. And what that does is that ends up impacting the next generation of boys coming up, thinking that that's what they're supposed to be as a man. So we have this cyclical event of martyrdom happening. And what do martyrs even get known for? Martyrs are known for their death. And I say this in the book because I say martyrs are known. Martyrs are. Martyr's message is through their death, and a hero's message is through his life. So how are you living? Like, how are you living for yourself? Have you ever thought of that? Are you just sitting there thinking, because I've lived a life of sacrifice. I've lived it more than most people because I did that. And I'm like, okay, and I lived a real life of sacrifice where my life was on the line for like a decade. Okay, so it's like, I know what that looks like. It's easy to lay down my life. I know how easy that is. But guess what's hard? It's hard to do this kind of work we're talking about right now. It's hard to look at yourself and say, I can be better. It's hard to say, how do I show up for my wife? How do I show up for my kids and be a beacon of light to them, not a martyr for them? It's harder to do that every single day than it is to say, yeah, I can die for you. Yeah, anybody can die. It's giving up. It's easy. So easy. Why don't you try living? Why don't you try saying that I deserve happiness and show the next generation that? Why don't you show your wife that you deserve happiness too? She loves you. She wants you to be happy, and she sees you being a miserable person. So why don't we stop trying to be the martyr and act like that makes a good man and start saying live like the hero, because that does make a good man. That's what people want. That's what the world needs. And so for me, when I take a look at this and I see guys that sacrifice, don't give themselves self-love, I'm like, bro, how much do you hate yourself? Why is that you're putting yourself through that pain and struggle when you actually deserve everything you wish everybody else has? You want everybody to have love. You want everybody to have happiness, and you deserve that too. So why do you think that you deserve less? Because you were a little boy once and someone taught you that, and they taught you that that was okay. And so I just completely implore men to start finding things to give back to them. Because when you fill, and I know you've talked about this, but when you fill yourself up, you can give more of yourself. You can't give outside of an empty cup. It's just impossible. You have to have some form of selfishness, which comes into self-love, which means how that looks for you and gives back and fills you up. That's important, because at the end of the day, that's what you're giving back to the rest of the world that you claim you love.
And I would say it's that right there. It's men trying to show up and serve their families without prioritizing their self-love, self-care first, that is creating the misery within their lives. In order to be selfless, you must be selfish first.
Yes.
You must become who God made you to be in order to serve another human being. Because
Yes.
if you're not, you're doing a disservice. Why the hell would I try to help somebody if I'm not helping myself? This is rule 5 of 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Clean up your room
Mm-hmm.
before you go out and try to save the world. It's all centered
Yeah.
around the same idea of we got to fill our cup. I always have this cup when I do my coaching calls because this is one of the core themes that I talk about all the time, Johnny. Is I always give this analogy, right? Everything that a man is called to do, from work, from service, from all the people that we help on a daily basis, because every single person, guy listening to this right now is helping people. You guys are out serving the world, whether it's in your work, your careers, your passions, your purposes. But eventually you're going to go serve, pour from your cup. That cup is going to be empty. And when you try to pour from an empty cup, what's the first? If I go walk downstairs and I pull a gallon of water out of my fridge and without looking at it, I try to pour and it's empty, I'm going to be frustrated because I just tried to pour from something that was empty. Well, take that analogy, bring it over into your life. When you go try to help somebody and you haven't taken care of number one first, you're going to be frustrated. You're going to be living a miserable life.
Yeah.
So this is
But
all like, this is one of the biggest things we talk about all the time here, John.
and then men take pride in that misery. And I'm like, bro, why? That pain and misery is not like, pride in that is not manly. That's not a good man. That is a man that is plaguing the world, because guess what?
Yeah.
You're not setting anything up for a positive effect. You're not setting the next generation up for evolution.
That's the guy sitting at the bar at 5 o'clock that is talking about how hard he worked all day long. Yeah, I was up at 5 o'clock and I got dirt under my fingernails, and he's soaking it away in the drinks, right? Like,
Yeah, I earned this. I earned this misery. Cool. All right, bro. How's that working out for you? Yeah, man.
How does a guy flip that? How do we begin to prioritize self-care, self-love? Because you and I have been doing this work for years, right? And it's easy. We can stand at the top of the mountain. We can speak into a microphone. We can talk about how great and simple all this stuff is. But it's getting in and doing the work. It's doing the grind. So, like, let's bring it down now. Love yourself. I don't, though, yet. Actionable steps. Take from point A to begin to fill my cup up.
Yeah, this is great because, like, I'm just as good as every other man at kicking the shit out of myself internally. So trust me, man. Like, I can easily do that. I do it really well, and I'm great at it, just like a lot of men out there. So I can speak to this because I mean, the work never ends. It doesn't matter if we're sitting here behind the microphone. You know this, Frank. It's like we're still doing it, and if we're not doing it, we're freaking frauds. Because at the end of the day, like, I still have the same struggles. I still have the same conversations. The only difference between me and a guy that's starting it is that the tools nowadays help me to get out of it faster. That's it. That's literally it. I haven't conquered shit. Most of us never conquer shit. That's not about conquering it. It's about giving yourself the tools so you don't repeat the past in your life, and you allow yourself to progress and grow. That's what it's really about. And so for me, when I look at this and I say, what's that tool to start flipping that for you? When's the last time you actually said you were grateful for something you did in this life? When was the last time you wrote that down and said, man, I really showed up today for my kids. I really showed up today. Like, I paid a lot of attention to them. I put time in. And the reason why a lot of men don't do this is because they've talked to themselves thinking that it was already expected of them and that every other man would do it. But there's not a lot of men doing it. And that's the solid truth, because we wouldn't have failed generations if they were. So we're giving ourselves this cop out of not giving the appreciation for the things that we do really well, the things that we show up for every day. We're making a cop out because we're giving some kind of justification. So the first thing is that I tell guys, if you can wake up a little earlier and literally just grab a journal and write like 3 things you're grateful for about you as a man, about how you show up. And it doesn't have to be crazy stuff. They don't have to be monumental milestones. They just need to be, man, I held integrity with myself today. I woke up with the alarm. I'm so grateful for that. That's dope. Like, I'm grateful because when I got out of bed, I walked over to the other side of the bed and I gave my wife a kiss. Even though she's sleeping, she may not know it. I gave her a kiss on her forehead. I'm grateful for that because that makes me feel good as a husband. And so you start appreciating yourself for the little things in life. You're going to start appreciating yourself for the big things. And in that, you're going to start to change this belief that you are just here to die and sacrifice and be a martyr. You're going to start changing that miserable mindset into that grateful mindset. And that's where I say guys can really start. And you can do a lot of damage on that old, outdated perception by just doing some small positive things like this.
Yeah, well, the power of gratitude is it literally is a shift in your perspectives. You talk about that old perspective, right? Like when you start your day looking for something to be grateful for, now you step out into the world through the lens of I love my life. And then you're gonna see, I've said this, man, like, the reticular activating system is a powerful part of our brain. When you begin to look for things to be grateful for every single day, the things to be grateful in your life will begin to appear more regularly because that's the perspective lens that you're seeing the world through. Is what am I to be grateful for? So I'm navigating the world today, right? Everywhere I go, I'm looking for things that when I wake up tomorrow, I can express gratitude for.
Yeah.
And that just now is the lens that I literally see and operate the world through.
Yeah.
So much
What's
power.
that?
So much
You
power
might
behind that.
know this. What's that term? There's a term for it. When you're like, hey, I want to get the brand new 2023 Dodge Ram, right? And you're like, I want a blue Dodge Ram, and you say that, and then you see them everywhere. It's something associated with your. I can't remember the term that
It's
your
your
brain
reticular
has.
activating system. It's the RAS. It's a part of your prefrontal cortex.
But don't they call it something like I thought they called it like there was a term for that specific, like that's where it's at, but there's a term for like that specific identification.
Oh, what's
I
it
can't remember
called?
what
Oh,
it is.
okay.
Sean Stevenson talked about it and he
Mhm.
mentioned that, and I can't remember the damn name of it. I always lose it. But that's where it operates out of, right? And so
Yeah.
like the whole thing is that like you're right. When we start to see that perception, we start to receive that perception. And then also we stop seeing, like, I find myself, I did this the other day, Frank. I swear to God, I literally was like doing something around the house and I was like, I'm so grateful for this moment right now. And I just popped in my head. I didn't like prompt it. It just happened. And I was like, whoa, where the hell did that, who said this? I was like, and that's one of those things. The more you flex that muscle, just like you said, the perception happens, but then the action actually continues to happen in your brain. And you start to have that conversation. And you're just like, whoa, who said that? I don't know who that was, but I love that. And I saw that. And you see it in the moment. And it, like you said, the perception now has started to officially shift. You're not seeing the negative things and complaining about them. You're actually seeing the beautiful things. Being, I'm so appreciative of this.
Yeah. No, I love that. Love that so much. I'm gonna text you later because I'm gonna have to figure out what this thing is
Dude,
called.
I can't
Well,
remember that
I'll
name.
drop it in the intro or something for you guys. Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought there was a freaking term for this, and I remember hearing it on like Sean Stevenson's, and I thought there was an exact term for that specific identification when our brains do that, and I can't remember what the heck it is, but
I'm
yeah.
sure. I'm sure there is, and it's probably something that both of us, when we hear it and read it, we're
We'll
like,
be
oh
like,
my God,
"Ah,
how did I
geez."
not remember that?
Everybody's gonna be
But
listening to
it's
this, be like, these
powerful,
guys
man.
were smart until this moment.
Right. We've lost half the audience at this point. They're
Yeah.
on Google looking up what is this thing called. Um, let's talk about habits. One of the things
Yeah.
I've heard and read you say is habits are abandoned if we are unaware what we're using them for. Explain
Yeah.
that to me.
So I wrote that, I love that because I was trying to provoke a contradiction to what society says today. Everybody wants to put in habits, and I'm a firm believer of habits, and I know you are too. Habits are absolutely key. We need predictability because our brains work really well with that, and it also primes us for certain outcomes within our day when we have those routines and habits in place. But the one thing that I've come to learn about myself and I've learned about giving people habits is that I can give you habits all day. I can break open and just give you all kinds of different habits as you can. You can change somebody's entire day filled with different habits. But if we don't know what the heck we're laying those habits over, it's not going to do any good. We can't have sustainable growth because what's going to happen is whether it's a month, 2 months, a year from now, all of a sudden those habits are not going to be good enough to overcome the underlying root issue that's deep down within the subconscious. We can't overpower that. That we need to know because it's going to come up somewhere else in our lives. It's going to affect us potentially in a different way. And that habit may have covered up one thing, but then we were left exposed in another way. And then that trauma or that programming, whatever it is, snuck up somewhere else in our lives. And so for me, I'm like, if I'm going to lay a habit over something, I have to know what I'm laying, why I'm laying it over it, and I need to know where it started. And I think when we can do that, we can actually really create such effective change that the habits will actually stay and we'll relieve ourselves from the underlying subconscious root that's going to poke out a little bit later in life or in a different area in life. So I want us to be very intentional with habits because I want them to be effective. I want them to be long lasting. Right? Like that is my intention for men is to have something that changes their lives from now to forever, not just from now to a year from now. Well, I want them to find that root. And that's kind of what we talked about a little earlier when we were talking about going back and dealing with the scenarios that kind of fit into shame and guilt and stuff.
Yeah, let's walk through maybe an example here if you can. I'd love to kind of maybe get a form, like once again, we're going to drive everybody, go get the book. Like we're not going to give you enough here today that you need to get this book. But let's say somebody's trying to create a new habit, right? Like hearing this, like I want to start going to the gym every day at 6 a.m. before I go to work. So that's the habit that I'm trying to create, right? So without knowing what that's for, how is that going to be a Band-Aid on something? And then kind of walk me through like, okay, what would be the process of understanding why I'm wanting to create this habit?
Well, and that's great because I love this example because the question also becomes, okay, if have you already been doing the gym every day before that? Okay, if you have, then you've already started to establish some, credibility with yourself to want to go to the gym. But if I just say I want to create that new habit,
no. This example,
okay.
no. I haven't been consistent in going to the gym for years. And the only way that I know that I'm going to be able to stick it is it's got to be before the morning, before I go to work. So that's the habit I'm trying to create.
Right. And
so I know there's going to be a series of habits built around that, right? I got to wake up on time. So there's a series, but that's going to be the core, right? I want to have the habit of going to the gym every day before I go to work.
That core piece is going to have following pieces of habits that have to change. And for you to follow through with all of those habits that are going to make that habit effective, I need to have such a firm why in what I'm doing it for. And that has to be the root. That has to be defined by the root. So I have to ask that guy, all right, brother, great. I love that you want to go to the gym at 6 o'clock, but let's go back. Why do you even want to go to the gym? Is it because the fact that when you were growing up, you were the skinny kid and none of the girls liked you, and there's some form of validation you're seeking because all the kids that got the girls were the big kids? I'm speaking from personal experience because that was me. And I'm like, is that why? Okay, cool. Now, all of a sudden, we've started to figure out the time in your life that we've identified as what's provoking this, the mentality that went behind wanting to go to the gym, and we're starting to flesh this out. Okay, cool. Now we know. So are you trying to appease other people for this? And how do we shift this to be because you actually want it for yourself, not for somebody else? Because what's going to happen is this guy, right? Let's say he's a single dude. We'll just play this scenario out. He's a single dude. He's doing that. And his root is because the fact that he was the cute kid, the skinny kid in high school. The girls all loved him as like a friend, but he was never the boyfriend, right? So he's like, cool. Now, this guy's going to go to the gym. A lot of beautiful ladies at the gym. They're going to start seeing him get in shape. And all of a sudden, one of those ladies is going to latch onto him. And he's going to start to have a relationship. Now, how does he hold on going to the gym when that relationship starts and life starts to shift? Right? If you don't know the why, the changes external to you in other areas of your life can cause you to break that habit a lot easier than you think. So while you may be like, bro, I stuck to that for like a year. Well, what happened at the 1 year? I got a girlfriend. Oh, well, did we understand why you actually went to the gym? Because was it to really appease girls? Did now the inner child who used to get shunned by women get appeased? So he accepted it and now he doesn't go to the gym anymore because he feels validated? Cool. That's our root. We have to address that before we throw the habit on top so we can make sure that the habit is always for us and not somebody else and not for validation externally.
I love this, man. My language that I've used for years now is all transformation is rooted in an identity change first. Like, yeah, if we're going to create a habit, like how is it going to shape us into the person that we're trying to become? So it gives that reason why, right? It's like starting with the end in mind is who are we trying to become? Then we can reverse engineer and build the habits that we need on a daily basis in order to become this man. It's always thinking about like so many people think first layer, right? It's like, no, we need to expand our level of thinking to go deeper. Like it's to not just what am I doing, but why am I doing these things? Who is it creating? Because then the how becomes very, very simple. If I know I want to go to the gym every day at 6 o'clock in the morning because I want to live to 80 because I got 3 beautiful children that I want to raise. Not my example, but I know there's a lot of guys out there that are listening to that, right? Now the why is I need to get my ass up every single day because there's 3 amazing souls that are relying on me to be here over the next 50 years with him, so you can anchor it to something that's really deep.
And that could be his root. That could actually, his present moment and present reality is his root for it. It doesn't necessarily always have to be deep in the past, but that's still his root. His root is that why of like, I want to live for them. I want to be that light of like health for them. And so that becomes his root. He already identified it. And it's also tied to his why he wants, what is the man he wants to show up as in the future, right? So you're doing it in this way where it's the same conversation you're having, and they're still identifying that root, and they're also identifying the desired man that they want to be. And that is helping them have something that is sustainable, that will last into their lives. And it won't get shaken when something happens or when something changes or shifts, right?
Yeah. Let's speak to that. The man that he desires to be. I think a lot of men reach a point in their life where they've maybe put what they want to a side. They followed the route. Like they were told, like, you got to go to school, you got to get a job, you got to get into a firm, you got to do these things, you got to find a wife, you got to start a family. And he reaches a point when he's late 30s, early 40s, and he's like been doing everything for everybody else, right? Kind of a little bit different type of a guy that we were talking about up until this point. So he's been living for everybody else, but nothing that he's doing is what he desires. How can a guy kind of begin to now detach himself and begin to create this vision of actually what he wants, despite having a lot of responsibilities? You can't just walk away from all of this, right? It's like, I can't just shut this off and then just do what I want to do. So is there a process? Like, how do we bridge the gap?
This is one of the things I love teaching on, because this was my bread and butter, and I would say all Rangers' bread and butter in special operations was compartmentalization, right? Like compartmentalization allows us to take bite-sized pieces of things, and it allows us to just focus on what's in front of us. And so while you have all these obligations, but there's a change that needs to be made because you want to find this newfound purpose of who you are, or define someone new in your life because you're just not happy with where you are. It's saying, okay, I have my responsibilities, I have all these things, but what is like one small thing in my life I can either add or replace, like remove something and then replace it, and do this small compartmentalization and just take one piece at a time. And as you start to integrate that into your life, then you can start to, once it becomes something that is, pretty much instinctual. So it's just something you revert to at that point, or becomes that daily habit within your life that is non-negotiable now, and it's fit in with all of your obligations. Now you can take another piece out and then stack it. And a lot of people call it like habit stacking, which doesn't necessarily have to be a habit. It can be something that you're just including in your life that isn't really like priming you for anything, but it's compartmentalizing the change that you want to make. You see the big change, sure, I get it. But you have to start with like that first brick, right? And so you slide that brick in, and that becomes the first one. And all you're focused on is making sure that that brick is absolutely perfect in there, right? And then you slide in that next brick, and then the next brick. And if you continue to compartmentalize, all of a sudden you're going to stand back and look at it and you'll be like, oh, I built a house. I built a brick house. This is dope, right? And so like for us, it was when we did that compartmentalization, like I would run onto an objective, and really the only thing I could think about was the front door. I was like, how do I get through that front door? Because on the other side of that, I don't know what's on the other side. I have to only think about what's in front of me. And so what you're doing is you're putting whatever it is to get you to this big, like the overall mission was my up here. And it was like, okay, successful mission is we capture or kill who's on here, and none of my guys get wounded or killed, right? So that's successful mission for me, right? So I know what that is. But then I had to compartmentalize and be like, right now, that front door is the only thing I see, right? So we know that the desire man, who we want to be, is out here. And the first piece is, what is it, that first piece I can integrate into my life that actually can coincide with all my existing obligations? Compartmentalization is something that I value highly in my life. And it's something that's helped me in every stage of my life. And I've never, ever felt like it was something that did a disservice for me. And it's helped me to constantly build different pieces and different avenues in which I wanted to design my internal man. It's helped me to evolve and adapt in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Tell us about the book, Design the Man Within, why you wrote it, and who's it for?
Yeah, brother. Appreciate you, and I appreciate you having me on the show, by the way, and just like always fun talking with you, man. It's just a blast. Like I look up and I like, geez, it's already been like an hour. So
Exactly. I'm like, yeah, I got to figure out a way to close this conversation out because you and I could
you're
just
like, hey,
run
tell
all
me
day,
about the
man.
book. We gotta get out of here. I love you, bro. Thank you so much. So much gratitude for you, for your community, for letting me come on and talk their ear off for a little bit, and just grateful for this life that we have where you and I get to jam out like this. I know we were talking about that a little before, but really grateful for that. So. The book is Design the Man Within. Y'all can find it at designthemanwithin.com. And it's for the everyday man. I talked to Philip Folsom, who's one of the OGs in the men's space. He was around for the first men's movement back in like the 80s and stuff. And Philip's a good friend. And he was telling me, he's like, yeah, the men's movement failed because the 97% of men, the average guy, got left behind because they didn't speak to him. And so that movement was never going to succeed. And I was like, man, we need to not have that happen in this movement because we need men to stand up to help create some organization and structure in this world that's turned into chaos. We need good men out there. And so when I wrote the book, the idea behind it was to give a book to the everyday man, the blue collar worker, the guy that's going home, and he is coming home. He's going to work and he's coming home with dirt under his fingernails and thinking that his duty is done for the day. And it's like, no, bro, we have the ability to be better than that. And so I gave this because that was the life I came from. And I wanted people to be able to resonate with the message of how to actually make these tangible changes in their lives. And so for me, I wrote the book to give it to that everyday man to say, hey, man, I get it. Maybe you haven't started this journey. And I wrote it specifically for that guy. So it's like, it opens the door for him. Hopefully, there's one or two pieces he can take out of that can change something in his life. So the perception looks a little different. The lens he looks through is a little different. The way he treats himself is a little different. And then that shows up in his life in other areas. And that's really what I gave it for. And then from there, if it opens that door enough, he can start to expand his development in other ways and find some of these other amazing men's books out there that are maybe a little more advanced. But I wanted him to have an open door. I wanted him to have a bridge to that. And so that's what I created for. That's literally, and this was me like 6 years ago, man. I'm just literally writing this to my past self and saying, bro, I know if you had this book, you'd be leaps and bounds ahead of where you were. So here you go.
Yeah, Tommy Breedlove, who we had on before you on the podcast, we were talking about how a lot of this work that we're doing is just us talking either to the mirror or to the older version of ourselves. And that was me. That's how I was able to, over the course of over 700 days consecutively, put a video on YouTube. Every single time I turned that camera and lights on, I was thinking about Frank Rich 10 years ago. Who did he need while he was struggling with it? So I love that, man. And I think the fact that you wrote the book for the everyday guy, there's thousands of books for the high performers. There's thousands of books for the peak performer. There's thousands of books for the athlete. There's thousands of books for the entrepreneur. It's the everyday guy that's getting left out, man. And that is the core of our society. The high performers are 2%.
Right.
The rest of the world is the everyday
Right.
guy.
Yeah.
It's funny. I had Kashif Khan on, the founder of the DNA company, a few weeks back, and he founded this company, and a lot of their early data was based upon the people that were spending like $20,000 to $30,000 on these genetics tests and the coaching that they were doing. So they had very skewed data. And then what they realized is when they were able to open up their company to the mainstream, like all this data that they were getting on the types of people, what drives human behavior, what drives performance. They had a lot of data from the beginning, but it was all based around somebody that'd be willing to spend $30,000 on personal development. Well, there's a small segment of the world. Now they've gotten it to where it's a few $100s for the test. It's like now we're actually getting data on what the world is, on society, and they're making incredible changes through all the work that they're doing. So incredible, guys. Design the Man Within, Amazon bestseller. I think you just hit number one in kind of the pre-sale category as well. So we'll link that all down in the show notes at Amazon. We'll get Johnny's Instagram. You connect with him. Incredible content. The podcast, like I said, he was also episode 87 on the Super and Life. So all that stuff will be plugged down there in the show notes. Last question, Johnny. You may not remember it from the first conversation that we had, but we like to end every episode with the same question. The title of the show is called The Superhuman Life. For me, living a superhuman life is a belief system. It's a way I try to show up and live out in the world every single day. And it includes two parts. I believe that we're all put here for a purpose. Like there's not like Johnny's not here by accident. Frank is not here by accident. There's a purpose in calling on each and every single one of our lives. I think a lot of people stop there, right? Especially people that come from a faith worldview. It's right. Yeah, God made me for a purpose. Fantastic. Like, the second part of living a superhuman life is, how are you developing yourself intentionally every single day so you can bring that purpose to the service of others? You pair those two together. That's what I define as living a superhuman life. But Johnny Elsasser, design the man within. As we end today's conversation, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Oh man, it is a really good question, because I think it's so beautiful. I would say that if I'm going to epitomize like how I believe living a superhuman life is, I would say that, first you got to be authentic with yourself. You can't be superhuman if you don't know who you are. So you need to believe in yourself, and you need to be the one that says that I'm going to be able to support who I am, stand firm in who I am, and also love who I am every single day. And then that's, to me, if you can do that every single day, that's your start to living a superhuman life. And then expanding from that is, how can I actually share that love, that energy, that strength, that confidence, that support with the rest of the world, so I can impact them through action and not have to impact them through words? Show them what it's like to live that superhuman life so they can follow along with me.
Incredible. Incredible. Guys, check out Johnny's book, connect with him on Instagram, check out the podcast, episode 87. We had him back here. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor, guys. We have seen tremendous growth. Actually, at the time of this recording yesterday, we broke another record, which we set that record 2 weeks ago, which we had set that record 2 weeks prior. So we're on a 2-week cycle now where we are shattering daily downloaded records, and it's all because of you guys. So we're incredibly grateful for every single one of you for getting value out of these. You want to help to continue this mission and get this message out there in the world. You can do that in 2 ways. First off, if you haven't done so, leave us that 5-star rating and written review. But more importantly, if there's a guy in your life that is struggling, maybe he doesn't know the man within. Maybe he needs to do some of this core development work on designing that man. Do us a favor, but do him the blessing by sharing today's conversation with him. But for Johnny Elsasser, your host, Frank Rich here, we love you guys. We'll see you next week.